You can say beaker or biker, but he prefers beaker. And Jim, where'd you work?
I was a professor at WVU, West Virginia University, Parkersburg campus, which is about 150 miles from the mother campus. I was the whole physics department.
He's the whole physics department, so
I
he had
didn't
to
have any
teach
assistants.
these guys everything, including how to work out the equations. So he had to find all those ones that didn't understand math, like Einstein, and really work with them. Those guys, well, you talk to, you read some of the stuff that Einstein's professors wrote. They didn't like him at all. Well, that's usually the best student, is the one that causes the most trouble. He wants to know how the formula works. How does this work? And well, come on, can't you read your textbook? No, I want you to tell me how that is. And those usually end up being the best people with the best theories. So Jim, I'm really excited to hear what you have to say and how you put this together and everything, because that's where all the good information is in the creation. That's where they find the stuff.
Okay, thank you. First of all, this isn't my theory.
Oh,
I have finished Einstein's theory. So this is the completion of Einstein's theory and his goal as of the time he died in 1955. He was actually on the right track, as I'll show in a minute. Einstein was about yay far from predicting dark energy in 1951, and Schrödinger was about yay far, actually did in a sense predict dark matter in 1947, yet neither one was discovered until the 80s or 90s. Now, but they were so set on what they're doing as being electromagnetism unified with gravity, they never thought of it as what they were doing as a secondary effect of gravity.
do you have your flash drive?
It's already in the files here.
Okay,
So I'm
I'll get it. I'll get it for you. Go ahead. I'll
So-
prepare this for you.
What is the secondary effect of gravity?
This is something high school geometry. You know extensions. An extension has an infinite number of points in it.
Right.
No matter how short along the extension, all the way down to zero, so you go from zero to an infinite number of points. Well,
Right.
zero is just one point. How the heck do you do that? Math hasn't figured that out yet. Now, Einstein's geometry is Riemannian geometry, and it's based only on extensions. Riemann, when he developed his geometry of surfaces, threw out points, individual points. He states right in the paper, I can't do point elements, so I'm doing out. My theory is based on metric elements or extensions only. Well, we need to know that 0 point, because what's in a 0 point?
The 0 point field, probably.
That's where all the quantum mechanics is. That's why they can't be unified. Quantum mechanics and all quantum theory is about points, discrete points. They've been excluded on purpose from the metric geometry, and Einstein knew this, but he was so set on the point element having electromagnetism in a point, he missed the fact that he didn't need that. And so I just went back to the error. And I combined, he is known for the last years of his life trying to find a unified field theory. He tried 4 or 5 different attempts. I combined, but all his attempts are separate. I combined 2 of his attempts. One gives dark matter and dark energy, the other one gives the electromagnetic theory.
So then what is the nature of the point element?
Let me get on that.
Okay, great.
Okay, let me see. Okay, that's already on. Let me see. So, okay, this is a physics of consciousness. What I consider to be the only path to understanding true consciousness.
We get that.
We agree with that.
Okay, slide 1 next. Okay, now there are 2 possible approaches to understanding consciousness. There's big C, consciousness. That's from the top down. That's saying the universe is conscious. You have there's a collective consciousness, cosmic consciousness. Ein Sof, you carry it 1 step further. Depending on your belief system, you say it's God. But that depends on a person's belief system. That's something that I'm not going to talk about God. I'm not going to talk about soul, because those are not scientific terms, because everybody has a different definition for them. In science, you have to define it precisely. So I stay away from those. All I say is there's consciousness, and that it survives It survives death. So you've got, that's just a general thing. The only way we have even thinking about big consciousness is through spirituality and metaphysics and things like that. I'm worried about little c, human individual consciousness. Now, the Western approach to consciousness, following the characteristics of Western science, is objective and reductionist. While the Eastern approach to consciousness, I'm talking mostly Hindu, Indian Hindu, and Chinese, the Japanese in that whole area, they follow Eastern scientific traditions, which is more subjective and holistic. Yet both approaches are valid and necessary to supplement each other to really find out what consciousness is. Otherwise, there's very little information or data to develop a scientific hypothesis or theory to explain consciousness. The problem is that neither the mind that seems to generate consciousness nor consciousness itself are directly observable. It's the old problem of consciousness is trying to observe itself and explain itself at the same time. You can't, that's just philosophically impossible. Okay. In a sense, then, consciousness applies a wider context than a person's individual self, which creates mind. That's the idea that there's a self, which is mind and body, but there's also a higher self, and consciousness is that higher self. But it is also separate from mind in the same sense of a higher self. Science only knows of consciousness indirectly through its effects on mind, brain, and living body, a case of mind influencing mind itself. Given this, it would seem to be at least non-material and in all probability non-physical. Seems to be, in all probability, non-physical. At least that's how consciousness is treated by many of the few scientists willing to tackle the subject. And most of the scientists won't even touch this with a 10-foot pole. They tried to get a forum at the American Physical Society 2 years ago. American Physical Society has like 45,000 worldwide physicists. It's the biggest physics organization, professional physics organization in the world. And they have separate forums. Like I'm a member of the Forum for the History of Science because that's my other background. They tried to get a forum for the physics of consciousness, and only of those 45,000 worldwide physicists, only 120 supported it, voted to do it. So they don't have a physics of consciousness forum. However, consciousness must be physical at some level of reality, because as we experience reality, because consciousness does have an effect on physical reality. If it wasn't physical at some level, it wouldn't affect physical reality. And our consciousness makes us do choices which affect physical reality. So at some level, it must be physical. And possibly, it only goes indirectly through mind and possibly directly through brain and body. Now, in the case of Eastern philosophy and science, the consciousness can directly affect reality through use of chi and things like that. So, as I said, it has to be, the two East-West has to come together as a starting point. Consciousness is always affected and or influenced by how much we know, our own individual storage of knowledge. The more we know, better both quantity and quality, the more conscious we are. Our knowledge of the external world, and by external world I mean everything outside mind. So that the external world would also include the body and the brain. Everything that is not in mind. Our cells and our material environment. The higher we can evolve our own individual level of consciousness. Now that's part of the problem right now, because our brains are full of stuff. We've overworked the brain and mind that nature's given us. I'll get into that in a while. But we also know that knowledge, informed philosophical knowledge of consciousness, does not necessarily offer a direct path to higher consciousness, as if other physical factors are necessary for new complexity of knowledge to emerge as a higher state of level of consciousness. And when I'm speaking at this higher state of consciousness, I'm talking about spiritual or mystical enlightenment. Sartori, seeing the light, sitting in a lotus, meditating for 20 years, and the guy comes up and hits you in the back of the lotus position, and that's supposed to snap you into consciousness. I'm talking your Buddha nature level consciousness. Now, we know that this doesn't work by the story of a gentleman named Hui Neng. Hui Neng was the 6th patriarch of Chan Buddhism. Chan Buddhism is Buddhism is taught at the Shaolin Temple in China back in the 6th and 7th centuries. Now, Hui Neng was a poor, illiterate boy, and he was listening in the marketplace to a gentleman reciting the Lotus Sutra in Buddhism, and he became naturally, spontaneously enlightened at the level of Buddha himself. And so he wanted to know what happened to him, so he went to the Shaolin Temple, nearby Shaolin Temple. Now the 5th patriarch of the Shaolin Temple knew immediately what he was, but he knew he was illiterate, so he only brought him into the temple as a servant. Sweep the floors, serve the food, that kind of stuff. Now, some years later, the 5th patriarch is dying, so he set forth a contest to elect his successor. So the head monk, who was philosophically enlightened in the Western style, as in the Age of Reason, but not spiritually enlightened, wrote this beautiful poem about enlightenment is the dust on the mirror. Well, one of the other servants read it to Hui Neng. Hui Neng, being enlightened, knew that this was wrong. Hui Neng has his friend write up another poem on the wall for the contest. See, nobody but his friend knows it's him. So he writes a poem and says, there is no dust, there is no mirror. And so on and so on. This is very famous. You can just look up on Wikipedia. This is very famous. And I learned it from D.T. Suzuki in his book on Zen, one of his books on Zen. Now the thing is, the 5th patriarch sees that, and he knows immediately that only Hui Neng could have written it. And Hui Neng's poem shows enlightenment. So he gives all the robes and all the stuff for the office of patriarch. He gives it to Hui Neng in secret, tells Hui Neng to run for his life, because when those who are philosophically enlightened and not spiritually enlightened would kill him. And that's exactly what happened. He ran for his life and took a few followers with him. So he's a 6th patriarch, also the final patriarch. But the lesson is that enlightenment at the philosophical level, as in the Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century in Europe, that doesn't get you spiritual enlightenment, because you sit around talking about it without doing it. You actually have to experience it. So I want to know, what the heck are they experiencing? That's the important thing, not all the talk about. Hui Neng then went on to write the Platform Sutra, which is one of the best and most referred to sutras in all of Buddhism, even though he's illiterate. He wrote it, and I imagine he just said it, transcribed it to somebody.
Could you repeat that title? The which sutra?
That was the Platform Sutra. Hui Neng. It's Huineng. Huineng. Hui Neng. And you just look them up on Wikipedia. They have an excellent article on Wikipedia all about this, including the poems that I was referring to. So we know that philosophy, rote knowledge alone will not get you to enlightenment. It helps in some ways, but in some ways it also detracts. You have to experience it. So what physically are you experiencing? That's the question. And how does it affect the brain? We do not need just an accumulation of more data and purported facts, either about consciousness or the physical context of consciousness and reality, but rather the emergence of a new physical context, i.e. physical context would be a scientific theory of both consciousness and the universe as a whole that better relates them together and explains their connection. That's what we need. So we have to take Hui Neng's and other stories from the East, Hindu, and we have to take them at their word and start listening to them, because they experienced it. They didn't sit around thinking about it, making up silly-ass theories. Sorry for the language. Silly-ass theories like a lot of philosophers and metaphysicians do today. In any case, higher levels of consciousness do seem to follow the same paths by which we gain knowledge, because this gives us experiencing enlightenment gives us a pathway to a greater understanding and knowledge that we can't get through normal. And I'll show why in a minute. learn about the external reality of the world, the internal self, because nature gave us a large and complex enough brains through evolution to be able to define and explore consciousness itself. Why in the world did nature give us these big brains? It's like the tabula rasa. Nature gave it to us. Why? How? I'll get into that too. Now, according to our present state of science and knowledge, we have learning and knowledge gathering. Learning and gathering knowledge. The 3D external world, we have sensations, our normal senses. These come up to the neural nets, basic neural nets of the brain. And then we get whole brain cognition, and that's mind. Whole brain cognition is when we have coherence of thought, what you're thinking on. And your brain is doing all kinds of stuff all the time. They used to say we only use 10% of our brain at any given time. They've now shown that's an absolute total false, totally false. What happens is only 10% of our brain is coherent at any time. The rest is snow. Scientists are finally looking at snow on the old TV screens, and those are all the neurons firing. But it only rises up to the level of being a thought, a stream of thought, by whole brain coherence. In other words, it forms a coherent pattern. And that's what you're thinking of right now. Right now, your coherent pattern is you're focusing on what I'm saying. In the meantime, you've got 90% of your brain is throwing out static. So science has now become interested in how that static becomes coherent thought. And they call that whole brain cognition, or whole brain coherence. That's the stream of thought at any given moment. Then, only then, does it go up to consciousness. You got to get to whole brain cognition of mind before it goes to consciousness. Now that's how we normally learn things, but we know more than we learn. There are unspecified sources of knowledge. Intuition. When you sense something, it's not. So we have intuition, things that we know without knowing how we know them. Those are coming directly from someplace else to consciousness, to neural nets, and then whole brain cognition of mind. This is the important part. This is what we know about our 3D world in normal time. This is what we know beyond our 3D world, how the world is connected as a whole, and what they call the specious moment, which is conscious time. That's when if you're happy, time goes faster than the clock, or you're sad, time goes slower than the clock. So there are actually two types of time. It's consciousness time and mind-brain time. My alarm didn't go off this morning, but my brain woke me up at 7:37. Because my brain, the brain and mind, are on universal time, clock time. And they've shown how that works through chemical reactions in the brain. How many can do that, wake up even if your alarm doesn't go off, you wake up exactly when? Yeah, that's because your brain is on the same time as the rest of the universe. But again, that's material time. We're talking about conscious time, which is different. And they call conscious time the specious moment. Now, we need to fully explain this, how we do this, to understand and evolve our consciousness. We have to go beyond. The enlightenment, the spiritual, mystical enlightenment, you experience it, but you don't understand what you experience and can't explain it. What I'm saying is, can they explain that? And yes, I think they can, by reference to a more expanded physical universe. Not material universe, physical universe. They're different. So what I'm saying is, down here, we have intuition and our sixth sense. And that is from a four-dimensional external world. When I talk four-dimensional, I mean a fourth dimension of space, where every point in the universe is directly connected to every other point in the universe. In other words, it's holistic, complete access to the whole universe through the fourth dimension. Now, and should go back one. Where do these two things come together? That's the important thing. Where do these two views come back together? In the neural nets, the fundamental neural net, and that neural net can affect our genetics. The neural net can affect, they've shown that over and over again in neuroscience now. The neural nets, like if you have PTSD or you're depressed all the time or something, you can actually pass it on to your kid. They've demonstrated that now. The bad things, but you can also pass on the good things. Because the neural nets, the fundamental neural net, has the chance to change your DNA, and then that's linked to genetics, which is the next generation. That's very important. This is where science starts. It's all science really has to go on right there. The fundamental neural net, how they work, how they affect genetics and become heredity for the next generation. And that's where I work. Neural nets hold a special place in both sequences, and our basic neural net patterns are inherited. As I said, we inherit the capability. Our brain is complex enough and big enough that we inherit this, and the rest of our life is just filling it in with knowledge and higher levels of consciousness if we do it right. Which means that we are born equipped for learning, experiencing, gathering of knowledge, and the ability to grow beyond our present limits and evolve to higher levels of mind and consciousness, including the big leap, which is to mystical consciousness. Nature must have had, nature doesn't do things without purpose. Everything in nature has purpose. I mean, bees are purposes, spread ball, everything. Nature must have had some purpose in doing this. Where does that come from? Within this context, we have developed Western science, which again is reductionist and relies on deductive logic. So we look for consciousness, or think of consciousness in terms of the smallest logical unit of the brain, where each one of us becomes aware. All I'm willing to say scientifically is that in the simple neural net we become aware of consciousness. That I can show, that I can prove, because that's where thoughts are stored and recalled and we recognize objects in the basic neural net. But I personally believe that is individual consciousness, the source of individual consciousness. That's harder to verify. But I can at least verify that's where we become aware of consciousness. This is fortunate because one of the primary problems of consciousness is how it can activate itself in thoughts, bring thoughts to mind, bring thoughts up to the level of whole brain cognition. Any external signals detected directly by consciousness must interact with as many neural nets as possible and have enough individual activation potential to bring a thought, idea, feeling, memory, or whatever to the conscious mind and whole brain cognition. Well, that's hard in the case of our sixth sense. It's easy with our sensations because our sensations are actually sending all those electrons, ion exchanges up through, I touch this and I feel it up here. Mind and consciousness, not in the brain. It's just the brain is where the neural nets are that we can interpret it. Mind and consciousness are actually the whole body. That's why I'm conscious of my foot up here, but my foot is actually down there. It's because this is where I think about it, forming thoughts about it. But my foot, my little toe, my big toenail and big toe is as consciousness as I am. It's just it doesn't have the neural nets to do the interpreting and thinking about it. In other words, Western science has finally come to consider the neural net correlates of consciousness to understand consciousness. That's what the scientists talk about, the neural net correlates of consciousness. At minimum of being aware, but possibly, depending on opinion, it can't be verified, so it's just scientific opinion. It's the seat of individual consciousness. Consciousness with a small c, underlined. This means we have reached a specific natural tipping point whereby a new revolution, a simultaneous leap in evolution is about to occur, and science needs to look at Eastern perspectives of consciousness and Western mystics too. I just say Eastern because more people know about them, less people know about the Western mystics that people have been taught. We need to look at those mystics, the ones who have experienced consciousness, East or West. But it's prevalent in the East because they've developed their science along that basis. And that can help guide us how to correct our science and take that all into account. Now, fundamental neural net is the physical key to understanding. At least A, the awareness of consciousness, if not B, individual consciousness itself, and possibly even consciousness, the big C, cosmic consciousness, if necessary. Because if there is such a thing of cosmic consciousness, and again, I consider that an opinion, whether cosmic consciousness, I do admit to collective consciousness, so I think there is a cosmic consciousness, yes, but we are part of it. We aren't separate from it, we're part of it. But if it's going to act, through individual consciousness back to the neural net, it's going to act through the neural net. So no matter which possibility you look at, you got to understand the neural net to understand anything. And that's what science is trying to do. So explaining how the neural net works and is affected by plasticity, the neural net will actually reorient itself, change the synaptic junctions or positions on other neurons, depending on what you know through new learning and experience. This effectively tells us how either big C consciousness or little c consciousness affects the human mind, and or how we become aware of our own consciousness, whatever consciousness is found to be in the future. When I say found to be, I mean verified scientifically, not just opinion. This means that physics and science can only approach a question of consciousness legitimately by attending strictly to realism and forgetting all the numerous philosophical and metaphysical speculations that have muddled previous attempts to understand consciousness. They thought, the philosophers, wait a minute, I'll give you a second. The philosophers talk about the hard problem. There is no hard problem. Not in the neural net, there is no hard problem. The hard problem is the philosophers and metaphysicians talk about.
What is the hard problem?
The hard problem is consciousness understanding itself, how we come up with feelings.
Oh.
Now I went to neural net, now I can explain it, so screw the hard problem. It's not hard at all. It's philosophers that made it hard, yes.
So I'm all confused because I guess we assume that consciousness does not have to be grounded in physical reality to exist or act or be aware of itself. So I
Well,
kinda
it doesn't have to be.
I understand this on the human level, but I don't exactly understand what you're saying because you're tying it back to physical reality.
I will base the whole thing on physical reality.
But what if...
Physical reality is what we believe in. Anything beyond that is opinion. Now, this is why I don't talk about soul. Because everybody has a different idea what soul is. I don't care what soul is. I don't care. I say, yes, we do survive. Consciousness and mind survive death of the material energy body. Absolutely. That's a minimum that I can verify scientifically. But how consciousness and soul are related is a matter of your religion and your personal opinion. I won't talk about soul. That's why I don't talk about God with a G, capital G.
But if there's an assumption that that's true and the consciousness survives, why is there a different mechanism operating?
It's not. It's all the same mechanism. That's what I'll be explaining in a moment.
Okay.
I'm actually coming up to that.
Did you say small c consciousness?
Small c consciousness is individual consciousness.
No, I know what it is. Did you just say it survives death?
Yes. I will tell you where and how.
That's personal identity?
Yes, the personal identity, personality is part of it. And it carries with it a virtual mind, so it can recreate mind whenever it wants to. So mind also survives in a sense. It's the material energy body that dies and turns to dust. And somebody gives me enough money on a grant, I am willing to spend 10 years, the last 10 years of my life, and verify that scientifically. I know how. Led to by this. I have a valid working model. I can't get into it because that would be a half an hour alone on that. I have a valid working model of how the fundamental neural net works, and both how and why neural plasticity works. I can not explain how it works, I can say why it works and why it depends on new learning and experience. Experience being actually affects the neural net far, far more intensely than just learning. Now, given this, we can now define life, mind, and consciousness in a physically consistent manner. Life, the biofield or life force that goes beyond just simple biochemistry, anatomy, and physiology, is a complex matter-energy metric pattern, as explained by general relativity. It's ruled by the quantized curvature of space-time. Not curvature of space-time, but quantized curvature of space-time, which is the unified field theory, corresponding to any given body or living organism. Hit the wrong button. Okay, skip next. Mind is a complex 3D metric, three-dimensional metric potential pattern, not an energy pattern. It is potential. When potential interacts with matter, it becomes energy. But it's just potential until it interacts with matter. In other words, there is no such thing as an energy field. They are potential fields. They have the potential to form matter or form energy, depending on the quantum, how the quantum curvature acts, and that's E equals mc squared. It's all potential. that corresponds to the organism or body brain, the whole organism or body brain, and operates through biochemically and physically through stable recurring electron-ion exchange systems. So down to your very cells where you have ion exchange through the wall of the individual cell and the components, electrical changes inside, that electrical pattern, the pattern, not the electricity, it's the pattern, is mind. And then finally, so mind is like an unbelievably complex bioelectric circuit with no wires except for neurons that extends throughout the living organism body that is interpreted physically as a single internally verifying electric field. That's mind. And consciousness then, it is the multi-leveled, complex magnetic, four-dimensional. Mind and body are three-dimensional. Consciousness is four-dimensional because it occurs in the points in space, and the points in 3D space are extended in and throughout the fourth dimension of space, which we can't sense except through our sixth sense and consciousness. So consciousness is a multi-level complex magnetic 4D point-by-point vector potential pattern. Vector potential pattern is what carries light waves across empty space between stars and your eyes. Common Maxwellian electromagnetism. But it is a higher order because it can build semi-permanent domains, structured levels, that become permanent by reinforcing each other's existence when they have become complex enough to sustain life. Notice I say semi-permanent and even permanent domain, magnetic domain structures, and that's what consciousness is. A permanent, our mind builds consciousness, it is a permanent and exists along the fourth dimension of space, not three-dimensional space. So when the three-dimensional brain, body, and mind die, what dies is only three-dimensional. The fourth dimensional extension is not affected because it's stabler than the three-dimensional body, brain, matter, energy, electrical pattern. Why magnetism? Well, because the relationship of electromagnetism, the relationship between electricity and magnetism, is exactly the same as the relationship between mind and consciousness. They hold the same relationship. They'd be in proportional ratios. Magnetism is a higher order because electricity is in the points of space and only in the points of 3 and 4 dimensional space. Consciousness, or magnetism, is not only in the points of 3-dimensional space, but extended into the 4th dimension. And it's a 4th dimension of space where consciousness survives when the body dies.
Can I just make sure you speak that electricity is in 3 dimensions?
It's a 3-dimensional phenomenon.
Yeah, I thought you said 3rd and 4th, but it's only 3rd.
Well, the points. Because what happens is we have a 3-dimensional surface, then that's what we live in. That's our 3D world. But there's another 3D surface on that, another 3D surface on that, like pages in a book. We live in that primary, which happens to be the densest part of the single field. When you think of it as, it gets more complicated there, so I can't get into that. All this is published, and all my publications are on the internet, so you look up at them. I've got videos of old talks that I gave here 10 years ago on the internet. So if you haven't got my card, get my card. It's all on the internet. You can look up. Now, why magnetism? Because 3 things. 1, magnetism can direct the flow of ions and electric charges. The solar winds, the north and south pole, the aurora borealis and australis. The ions, electric charged ions from the solar wind, are following the magnetic field lines into the North Pole and South Pole. They hit the atmosphere. That's commonly known. That's simple Maxwellian electromagnetism. Magnetism of a higher order and can guide how electricity works. Magnetic fields are additive in a special way. Of normal gravity, electricity, and magnetism, only magnetism do this. Unlike electricity, magnetism can form domains. Those are interlocking levels of activity. I mean, this is physics. This is freshman physics, high school physics.
Yeah, but everybody doesn't understand it.
There's a domain. There's a domain. If you have a charged magnet, the whole thing isn't all the magnetic spins of the atoms line up together. You get small domains where the magnetic spins of the iron atoms line up together. They form a domain. then you have different domains. Those different domains, one may be this way, that way. But if it's magnetized iron, most of them are the next level domains, and the next level domains, and the next level domains. The domains keep on getting bigger and bigger until it's a whole magnet and then the iron bar is magnetized.
And they're stable.
They're stable, yes. Because the domain below and above makes them stable.
So you have to understand this, but once you do it, all what he's saying makes total sense. That
Yeah,
you're building a structure, a domain, where the information can
And stable. And consciousness is very, very stable because it's magnetic domains.
You
The bottom domain is the water magnetic, the magnetic spin poles of the individual water molecules,
Yeah.
actually the oxygen.
And those
water
spins can
molecules.
store
That's
information
most
right there on that structure, on that stable structure, and there's your consciousness sitting there. Okay? You store
The
information right there.
physical correlate of consciousness.
Yes.
Again, I will verify that that's where we become aware of it. I think that is where we become aware of it. It's also our individual consciousness and stuff, and that's an opinion. Now, everyone in science seems to have forgotten Maxwell's fourth law. Every electrical change in nature generates around it a magnetic field. They talk about, you know, the electrical charges across synapses. The problem is you've got the electrical charges going across synapses from neuron to neuron. What they forget is those moving charges make a magnetic field around it. It's that magnetic field that places the synaptic bulbs on the other neuron and guides them where to go. How do we look at the electrical charges in the mind? Nuclear magnetic imaging, NMR, MRIs, magnetic resonance. How do we change it? Somebody gave the other day by putting a magnet up here, and it's transcranial magnetic stimulations. They're using the magnetics to derive. They keep on looking at the magnetics of the brain and saying it's electricity. No, it's the magnetics, you stupid idiots.
Yeah, we're doing an MRI, we're not taking a photo. We're taking...
You're looking at the magnetic fields, how
Yeah,
they
we're looking at
change.
magnetic fields in your brain
They're
from out
looking
here.
directly at
We're
consciousness.
just feeling that field, and then we're drawing a picture of it, and that's what you look like.
There's a scientist named Persinger, Michael Persinger, up in Canada for 30 years. He's been putting electromagnetic induction coils on your brain. It's called the God helmet. Why? Because if he hits the right frequency, a magnetic variation frequency, he can make you have visions of God or visions of other people talking to you. In other words, he's stimulating or emulating conscious activity. Not by putting electrodes on your head, by putting magnets out here and directing the magnets at a particular part of your brain where consciousness is stronger than other parts and affecting the neural nets and how the electrical charges move on neural nets. And you get visions of God. Visions that you're out of body. He can duplicate those, but it's done magnetically because consciousness is magnetic. Okay. I can skip this one, rest of it. I think I explained enough on that. So consciousness with the big C, what the heck is it? Well, these domain levels, they start with water molecules and individual atoms and molecules in your body. Then you build domain on domain, domain, until you get up to units in your body. The heart has its own magnetic field. The body, then that adds up, and that's stable in its own right. Then that adds up to the whole magnetic field of the body, which comes out here, goes out around like that, and then comes up through your nether regions up here. And so the magnetic field around the body is like this. That's the highest domain. Now, but the heart domain, the heart has the strongest magnetic field in the body. The brain has the second strongest in the body. But the brain is more complicated because the heart actually has more neurons than the brain. But the heart doesn't have the neural nets that the brain has. That's why we don't use our heart. It's the thing. It's neural nets where we think we're aware, because that's where neural nets are. They're discovering also, after the heart, they've just discovered that your gut is the next thing. It has more neurons than anything else after the heart and brain. So the gut plays a special role in all this too.
I've heard where the gut is sometimes referred to as the second brain.
Yeah, that's what they're doing now.
But according to what you just said, maybe it should be the third brain.
Yeah, actually it should. If you go by the density of neurons, it's the heart. If you go by the density of neural nets, it's the brain. So then after that comes the gut. They
If you
call it
don't
the
mind,
second
one
brain.
other quick question. Maxwell's fourth law says wherever there's an electrical charge, there's a magnetic field.
No, wherever there's an electrical change, so electrical
Change.
charge has to be moving.
Yeah.
Okay,
Then the magnetic field, opposite of magnetic field, moves electric charges.
so
That's a simplification of Maxwell's.
if there is a magnetic field, must there be, I mean, it's still
Well,
electromagnetic,
The,
right?
the question that comes up here, and I think you're trying to ask is, then wouldn't the Earth's magnetic field affect our consciousness? No, because the Earth's magnetic field only affects our overall magnetic field. It's not complex enough to affect our heart and such directly.
No, what I'm getting at is, if there's a magnetic field, must there be something electrical too?
No.
Only to
The
create.
law,
a
once you
structure.
create the domains, it doesn't have to be. You can
Okay.
have that
It's a permanent structure created by the electrical movement.
Yeah.
Then it's there.
Then
And
it's
you can
there,
turn the
yeah, then
electricity
it's
off,
there,
it's still
then
there.
it's
Still
there
there.
and controls the electrical.
Okay, so
Now, we
that's-
can create magnetic fields that are electrically created. We
Yeah.
can do that and hold
No.
them.
So the electrical business is, in a sense, more physical, if you will, more third dimensional than,
Electrical is completely three dimensional, as is matter and energy.
Yeah.
but
The only thing is, the only thing that exists, the fourth dimensional extension of our body is purely magnetic.
so then, according to what you're saying, magnetism is a sign of the fourth dimension?
It is the fourth dimension, in a sense. Because, well, you'll see that when I get to the equations.
Okay.
You don't have to understand the equations, just
Alright.
what they mean.
Alright.
Then you have big consciousness, C. Well, what is that? Well, at the very least, our magnetic field has the magnetic fields of everything in the room, which all add together because that's another domain. The magnetic fields of the building, the magnetic fields of this city, the magnetic fields of this continent, the magnetic fields of the Earth, and everything adds to the magnetic field of the Earth. Then the magnetic field of the Earth, they're all domain structures. So then the magnetic field of the Earth combines the magnetic field of the Sun and the other planets to make the magnetic field of the whole solar system.
Right.
Our solar system magnetic field adds to this arm of the spiral galaxy, Milky Way galaxy, which adds to the galaxy. Then finally, the whole galaxy has the same structure. You look at the galaxy, and it's got an overall magnetic field, which is a combination of all the domains, and it looks just like ours, only it comes out of the middle of the galaxy. Those are all domains. That's domain structure. So, what is all that? Well, you get up to the fourth dimension, and there's only one thing, and that's single field. And the single field splits into the electromagnetic field and the gravity field when it becomes three-dimensional, which I'll get the equation. So if you want to talk about superconsciousness, at least collectively, there is a superconsciousness. It's a consciousness of everything put together, every living thing, every inanimate thing put together. Now, I don't think inanimate objects have consciousness, but they have the same three-field structure, because I believe mind and consciousness are the complexity. So all life has that mind and consciousness because of complexity. But then you come something like a star. A star is darn near as complex as we are. So a star, or a very complex system like the Earth, might have a form of mind and consciousness of its own. Not like ours, but it might have its own because it has those same three fields: matter, energy, electricity, and magnetism. What is alive is only a matter of how complex it is, and that's you can decide one way or the other. I don't think a pebble, I don't think a salt crystal has mind and consciousness, but other people do, and that's fine. That's opinion. That cannot be verified. So I don't consider it science. Now, important note: life, mind, and consciousness are not the overall matter, energy, electric, or magnetic fields. In other words, this overall magnetic field of my body, that's not consciousess. It is the pattern that goes all the way in domains down to the atoms that make my body. It's the pattern that is life, not the magnetic field. It's how it's patterned. Although I think probably the way I explain what Lee does, we've all watched him work. As I said, the magnetic field of my body goes forever, added up through higher and higher domains. The thing that comes out like this, it's stronger right here, then it's a little bit weaker, then it's a little bit weaker, and it goes out like that. I think what Lee is doing is just detecting that overall field and getting the pattern out of it. And that actually fits with the diagram of magnetic field.
Well, you mentioned Tai Chi, I mean, that's kind of
Yeah.
like what you're,
I'll mention it again.
okay.
Okay. But it's not the overall field, it is the pattern, it's the matter energy pattern from the atomic level up, the electric pattern from the atoms on up, and the patterns of domains for consciousness.
And our intuition is totally based on pattern recognition.
Yeah, that's actually what I call it. I call it pattern resonance or pattern resonance. with these definitions in hand, where can physics get facts and data to lead along the path to a theory? Remember, we have to still do the overall physical context to understand consciousness. In other words, that's the unification theory. And give a more complete understanding of consciousness. Well, we turn to those who have experienced consciousness directly through NDEs and the spiritually enlightened. Those who have successfully increased their own levels of consciousness so they have actually existed. They have experienced the fourth dimension of space. That's what an NDE is, and that's what spiritual enlightenment is, at the Buddha nature level.
Are lucid dreams fourth dimensional?
Border. They're all four dimensions at the same time. In other words, they're three-dimensional and along the fourth dimension at the same time.
Okay.
And the more you have control, the better they are. I can explain dreams, so I'm not going to, that's beyond
Yeah,
this.
okay, no,
That's
just-
actually easy to explain, much to the consternation of psychologists who have been trying to explain dreams for a long time. But what are NDEs? Mystical spiritual enlightenment. They are direct experiences of a higher fourth dimension space that comes only when sensory input from the three-dimensional world is completely shut off, so that the mind can look at those weak signals from the fourth dimension that you're getting through consciousness. You have to shut it off somehow because you're getting so much sensory input from the 3D world, it overwhelms everything. You have to shut it off through meditation, and Tai Chi is meditation and motion, as is Aikido, which I've studied. I had a little bit of Kung Fu, but unfortunately, after a couple of months, my real stuff, not the TV stuff, the real stuff, my master had to leave, and so I had that for a couple of months. I ended up in Aikido, and my teacher in Japan in Aikido back in the 70s was Steven Seagal, before he became a movie star at his dojo. He is phenomenal. He is real, despite what other people say. Steven Seagal is for real because I watched him train Japanese Aikido black belts at his dojo in Japan. So he is real. I would never mess with that guy. Never. Someday I want to meet him too, see if he remembers me. I was only in his dojo for half a year. Okay, you have to cut off the 3D sensory world completely. And the mind can only get sensory input through the sixth sense, which comes through consciousness with its connection simultaneously to every point in the universe. Every point in our three-dimensional space, by the geometry of the unified field, is directly connected to every other point in space. And you have to cut out your three-dimensional senses to realize that physical connection. What does this mean? The universe is not exactly what we normally sense through our five senses, because our five senses are three-dimensionally biased. Everything we've learned and experienced is in three-dimensional space. So we have to get rid of that bias before we can open up to experiencing higher space. Our 3D space is embedded. This is a theory right here. This is a physical theory. Our three-dimensional space is embedded in a fourth dimension of space. And we are evolving, we're presently evolving as humans to directly sense that dimension. Now this leads to a whole new theory of the universe, which I call single field theory, which is a finished version of Einstein's unified field theory. He was going from 3 dimensions up to 4 by unifying electricity and magnetism to make the unified field. I don't. I got the single field, which breaks apart and becomes electromagnetism and gravity in 3-dimensional space. So we're looking at the same thing from opposite directions. But it is, I use this equations. Why?
That's your Copernican revolution.
This is the revolution right here. This theory unifies everything we presently know in physics, although it's not a theory of everything. They talk about theory of everything. Only an idiot would talk about theory of everything now. We have to progress consciously for another 1,000,000 years before we can even think a theory of everything. So mine is a theory of everything we presently know about the universe.
Thank you.
I hate the word. I hate the word. I hate the word toe. Theory of toe stands in physics for my big toe is a theory of everything, not a theory. Come on, how egotistical. But Copernicus basically effectively got rid of an Earth-centered universe. We have scientists who are still trying to make an egocentric universe. People, I always use that line. People laugh at it. Now here it is. Here's your here's a 5th dimension. Now, it's anti-symmetric. and single polar spherical. Our three-dimensional universe is double polar spherical. In other words, the Earth, all figures have north-south pole. Fourth dimension is geometrically different because it only has a single pole. So an extension from a point in three-dimensional space goes up, twists around 180 degrees, and then comes back to the three-dimensional surface underneath. That's strict Riemannian geometry.
That
But
looks
it's
like,
got a twist to it, so there's a twist in every point in space.
that looks like the mystical tree of the Kabbalah.
Doesn't it though? God damn, I didn't even realize that until about a few weeks ago. So we've got single field five-dimensional space. It breaks down into an antisymmetric tensor for electromagnetism and a gravitational gravimetric tensor. Now, it splits down between point, discrete point, and extension. So gravity is just a point in five-dimensional space, or four-dimensional space, whereas electricity is an extension. Now, there's something called the hierarchy problem. Why the heck is electromagnetism so much stronger than gravity? Well, there's why, because gravity is just a point in the fourth dimension, whereas electromagnetism is full extension. That's why it's so much stronger. That is one of the primary problems of physics, and will guarantee me right there a Nobel Prize. This point and extension. Our space is dual. We have a point space, which is absolute. Newton was right. And a point space now is now the quantum point space. Absolute space is made of quantum points. That overrides an extension relative space. So our space is dual. And that's what they think. Einstein got rid of absolute space, Newtonian absolute space, just for quantum theory to reinvent it in a standard point model. Although they don't do it yet, and I recall, if I called them, they say they're just doing Newtonian absolute space, man, they'd beat me up with a stick and fry me.
You
Then
won't
burn
have
me
to
off
work,
my head.
you won't have to work these formulas to figure them out. They just
You don't even know.
represent what we're talking about.
Yeah, you don't, so you don't.
There will
worry
not be
about
a
formulas.
test.
Now this gives me the, what's called Faraday tensor for electromagnetism and space-time, and then it splits up into three parts in three-dimensional, or four-dimensional space-time. Three-dimensional space-time. The symmetric or metric tensor, which is general relativity. The non-symmetric tensor, which Einstein used in 1951 to calculate how the non-symmetric tensor affected the movement of a particle. And he said that his calculation showed it's negligibly small, in other words, way too small, and it didn't matter whether it was charged or not. Well, then it's gravity, it's the dark energy. That's dark energy. And this is broken down into this form in 1947 by Schrödinger, who was working with the antisymmetric tensor. And he noticed, well, the constant comes out here. At the time he said that could be Einstein's old cosmological constant, which Einstein didn't believe in anymore, so he threw it out. Well, they use that now. It's called lambda CDM, dark matter.
He throws it out and then he can't
So-
understand gravity.
They had, in 1947-51, they had the calculations for dark matter, dark energy, and didn't know it. And I'm not the only one who says that. I've seen at least one other person who's saying that too. They could have predicted it. They would have predicted it. Physics would have been unified right now. Because what you do is you talk not only about the metric or measure element, extension element, but then you adjust Riemannian geometry, which is what I did for the point element, or the 0 point. And then that allows me to include quantum theory and all this. Then that breaks down into what's called the Lorentz equation for electrical magnetic forces, but also what I call gravito-gravmetism. This formula was written by Heaviside in 1892. And it's used by a few people who are almost smart to explain dark energy, or what they call the torsion field.
Torsion, except
Torsion field, they think it's gravity. It is gravity, it is. But it's dark energy. Why don't you learn that? It's dark matter, dark energy. They haven't figured dark matter, dark energy yet. But they're already doing the equations. They're already doing the calculations. I don't have to do the calculations. They've all done it. They're just misinterpreting it.
Yeah.
That's why I say this isn't my theory. I just put together everybody else's in a single structure. Then when you break this apart, this is four-dimensional space-time, space-time. When you break it down, separate space from time at the microscopic level, you get the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And I've actually derived this from Newton's second law, F equals ma. And I've taken this and algebraically and put space and time back together and gotten Newton's second law, F equals ma, as well as Einstein's special relativity equations using simple algebra, high school algebra, except for power series, which is college algebra. Then this becomes the Schrödinger equation. Schrödinger equation is just a three-dimensional reflection or expression of single field density variations in 4D space. There is total unification right there. Not only that, this unifies all of Newtonian physics with the quantum electromagnetism. It's all one theory. As I said, this is not my theory, I just finished their theory. Anybody know how I'm doing for time? Probably running out of time, I'm still got a lot to do.
It's,
Okay.
yeah.
Now, the old thermodynamics is not up to par, because it only talks
You
about...
got 15 more minutes.
Okay, it only talks about entropy or chaos. But you know what? The old thermodynamics is about ideal closed systems. In reality, there is no such thing as a closed system. All systems are open. So, old thermodynamics with entropy is just an idealization of reality. Now, they use something called Prigoghine's principle to correct this sector. So I said, make Prigoghine's principle the fourth law of thermodynamics. And then they also use chaos and complexity to show how gravity and the natural forces work on entropic systems. So what the heck? Just make chaos and complexity the fourth law of thermodynamics. Don't use them to correct the second law, or third law, which everyone does. They become laws of their own. So then you take Prigoghine's principle, so I don't have time to explain it. You can trust me. He won a Nobel Prize for it in '73, I think. But take those together, because they correct the other theories, make those new laws of thermodynamics, but put them together and they give you physical evolution. So now evolution for the first time can explain all the order in the universe, including how galaxies, stars, and everything form. The big thing of thermodynamics is it can't explain order in the universe because it's about disorder in the universe.
Yeah, it's all about it.
You have these laws. Then the final law is Murphy's law. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong, which sounds vaguely like quantum theory. It has an element of uncertainty, which is quantum theory. So now I've expanded thermodynamics, and that does some weird shit.
Does thermodynamics suggest that the universe will burn out?
Yes, it's called the
Entropy
heat
will-
death of the universe.
But we have neg entropy, so it's growing, so it
Yeah.
goes both ways and depends on.
Entropy
Torsion will
increases,
change
so
it.
we have what's called heat death, where everything
Right.
in the universe is the same temperature, which is just above
A cold
the
death.
cosmic microwave background.
But in order to have that, you have to put blinders on.
Okay.
Once you take everything he's got, it can grow back and it doesn't
Yeah.
have to disappear.
Well, I have a different entry universe.
Okay.
Now, when you take this into account, you look at evolution. So here's Darwinian evolution. You've got mutation, life, from basic chemical reaction, somehow you get life, body, the mind, brain, and consciousness. And consciousness is an epiphenomenon. That's the standard view. Epiphenomenon is an accidental creation of mind. That's an epiphenomenon. Well, that's Darwinian natural selection, but that's also modern, which is mutation and genetic drift, but it's all bottom up. This is bottom because
Right.
it adds stuff up.
Right.
Now, changing thermodynamics, I can now rewrite this. And I get something like this. Come on. The new theory of thermodynamics applies a new theory of evolution, which includes top-down evolution. This fixes many of the problems of the old 20th century evolution theory. And this is new evolutionary theory. Top is consciousness, it's the most complex. So these are levels of complexity. From basic chemical reactions to life is a chemical complexity. From life to mind is a functional or electrical complexity. Then from mind to consciousness is a memory complexity. So they're emerging complexities. But at the same time, when a complexity evolves, it can organize that which it evolved from. Take, for example, a hurricane. A hurricane is a complexity. Once a hurricane forms, it starts organizing itself internally and having little baby tornadoes to the side, and then it moves. But it burns out by physical. Thing is, life doesn't burn out. It's too strong, too...
Neg entropy, it grows.
So what that means is you can have mind to life, mind affecting life, top-down evolution. That's how we got our big brains. We filled them up with enough facts that nature had to find a new way to absorb all those facts. And 100 to 200,000 years ago gave us our big brains, and that's Homo sapiens evolving from whatever his predecessor were. That's one of the big problems. There's another big problem. It's called the Cambrian explosion, when one-celled animals all of a sudden, one-celled animals have been around for like 3 billion years. They form sponges, which are one-celled animal communities, but all life was one cell until 500 million years ago, I think it was, the Cambrian age. Then all of a sudden, over a 2 million year period, you have all kinds of insects and everything else. Well, that was electrical. That's why we have right brain, left brain, positive, negative electricity, duality. That's the mark of electrical. So that was a mind. The mind had evolved and organized life to cause multi-celled animals. Now, they've never known why. This is where the people who think in, what do they call that type of evolution? Basically, God evolving us. No. So our own minds are evolving, it's the minds of living. It's this complexity. That then you had a bifurcation, because when you have a new complexity forming, you can form branches. One branch was based on form, plant life based on photosynthesis. No brain, essential organism. And the other is function, form and function, and duality. Functional complexity became animal life with brain and central nervous system. That's the bifurcation. This alone is the biggest problem in all of evolution theory.
What is?
Cambrian explosion.
The break between plant and animal.
Well, but that came a million years supposedly after multi-celled animals. We got multi-celled animals, and then it broke.
And then the break.
Yeah, then it broke. But now, this is where we are, right here. Those brains who were given 200,000 years, 100, 200,000 years ago, they're full. They're hot. They're changing through learning, experiencing. They're changing, rewiring themselves all the time. We're ready for a new leap in consciousness where Homo sapiens dies off.
Did you see in the newspaper or in the news about a week ago, they discovered some skulls in Morocco, which moves 200,000 back to 300,000?
They keep on changing it. 10 years ago it was 100,000.
No, but my point here is that you can see 300,000 years ago.
They found skulls that go back before we came out of Africa, so they think that humans did not come out of Africa anymore, because they had skulls in Romania or someplace that actually were before we could have come out of Africa, human skulls.
I think it was in China, but in any case.
Well, no, they have them all over the place.
Right, okay. But my point here was that you can actually see you take a 300,000-year-old skull, which
Yeah.
is defined as a human skull,
Let me get on.
and you see the 200,000.
What I'm going to do in a minute is going to explain all this.
You can see how it
He's running out
evolved.
of
Single theory also leads to new logical, instead of guesswork and speculation, Big Bang model of the universe. See, both quantum physics, electromagnetism, and electromagnetic theory and general relativity can only go 13.5 billion years back because they're measuring extensions. You have to unify two to go back to singularity, which is basically a discrete point. Since I've unified them, I can now go back all the way to the Big Bang without speculation and say how it happened. And what happened is, for the Big Bang to occur, the Big Bang morphed into a zero-dimensional point that was virtually three-dimensional. Now, in order to do that morph, which would have taken an infinite amount of time, past the 13.5 billion years that present science says, that morphed into a zero-dimensional point with this virtually three-dimensional, that point was aware of what it was, had a primal awareness, and it tried to collapse back in. But when it tried to collapse, it couldn't because it's virtually three-dimensional, and the singularity is no-dimensional. They couldn't do it, so instead it duplicated itself, creating four-dimensional space. It created a torque in the fourth direction of space, but also it had a primal awareness. Now then, when we get up to the end of cosmic inflation, when our present universe became, because of the collapse of the expansion, creating all matter, energy, the cosmic microwave background and everything, the virtual torques in the fourth dimension unified into the single field. But all the primal awareness within the points became a semi-physical pre-consciousness field. And that is what drives evolution and continuing evolution is. So everything we are is two fields, all matter, energy, and everything else, all electricity, magnetism, gravity, everything is part of the single field, which is a field of potential. It is potential to make energy, it's potential to make matter, it's potential to make electricity, it's potential to make magnetism, depending on how its four-dimensionality breaks down to three-dimensional space. And then those are just structures. So everything is just structures, physical structures within this. But every point in those physical structures has that primal awareness, the pre-consciousness field, which drives evolution. In other words, all sentient life, all conscious life in the universe is nothing more than a universe as a whole trying to realize itself and be consciousness of itself. So our consciousness does not die, it's along the fourth dimension. It just goes into the fourth dimension. If you're a high enough level of consciousness, you are aware of that new existence in the fourth dimension, and I explain ghosts and everything else based on that, because of the permanent structure. Now, people ask me at this point, is the universe conscious? Well, yes and no. The big C consciousness, I think, is evolving. Whether it pre-exists or not, I don't care. Because it is evolving, if it did pre-exist, because of us adding to it our own consciousnesses. It's again, it's domain, it's just a larger domain structure. So we are, in a sense, the universe, our consciousness, is a universe trying to find out about itself. So what we need to do, that is our purpose. That is the purpose of all life. The universe realizing and becoming conscious of itself. Internally consciousness, because there's not necessarily anything external to the universe that it can compare itself to. So there's our purpose in life. Yeah. Is the universe conscious? Well, if there's a single field which connects everything, and there's one consciousness in that single field, then the universe is that one consciousness. It's multiple consciousness, connected consciousness. So we have, our collective consciousness makes up human consciousness. Now, as I said, we fill human consciousness. We have filled, sorry, this is what happened, there I mentioned. Now, why is all this? Because our world is about to and very ready to, why? Because our world is about to and very ready to evolve in unexpected ways. In other words, we're ready, our brains are full. We're ready to seek the next level of consciousness as a species, not as individuals. We will not be Homo sapiens anymore. We will be what I call Homo paradoxus. Some people call it Homo noeticus, because it's based on mind, noetics. I call it Homo paradoxus, because we will still be three-dimensional materially, but we will be thinking and experiencing four-dimensional space at the Buddha nature level. That's the next step of evolution. I've got ample evidence of that. If we look at our own history, let's skip that. Now, if we go back even further, 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens mind-initiated evolutionarily. That increasing complexity of memories, knowledge, and thought and mind developed science. So that 60,000 years ago, we start thinking abstractly, and they have archaeological evidence of that. That's standard. Then we had zero scientific revolution. That's Thales and Pythagoras in Greece. Although at the same time, you had Buddha and Mahavira in India, and Lao Tzu and Confucius in China. It's like a worldwide event, about 600 BC. That was a minor leap in consciousness. And out of that, in the West, evolved science. Then we had a scientific revolution when 3D space and time were finally defined by Newton. Then we had the 20th century, 1900, the second scientific revolution, when we went to 4D space time. So you can actually mark these steps in evolution by how we think of space and time. Now this implies, this line, science, 5D space and time. At the same time, evolution, biological evolution, complexity of consciousness, measure these levels of consciousness. Notice how they're getting closer together and over shorter periods of time, forming a pyramid that is right about now. And that pyramid just happens to come along with technology, what they call the singularity, where AI is finally developed, all coming together at one point in time. I claim this year is that time.
This year?
Evolution has already started, I have evidence of that. We're about to undergo radical change in everything we know that due to top-down evolution, from consciousness to mind to body and brain. The evidence is clear. Discovered neuroplasticity in '99. Then in about 2004 or 5, they discovered the brain rewires itself from back to front over. Now I think those are probably old features. But 3 years ago they discovered a whole new form of neuron axon they'd never learned of before. It's far more efficient than our normal neurons. And I say this is due to the revolution because the evolutionarily.
4 more minutes, will be 5 minutes late.
Okay.
Okay, we gotta cut it.
So a new form of neuron axon has been discovered in mice. Mice are going to out-evolve us, I guess. No, they say our brains are like mice brains, so if mice brains have it, our brains have it. It's something like 80 to 100 times more efficient. It's basically neurons that don't have the nucleus and head. Neurons that are all axon and synapses. They're far more efficient than normal. I would expect something like this if we're going to beef up, if nature's going to beef up evolution, I expect something. Then just 2 months ago they announced a new single neuron neural net that covers the whole outside of the brain. I say that's only been developing the last 100 years or less. And I think these two are because of that next leap. Now to bolster that, the rising number of births in gifted children, larger percentage, the number of gifted children is skyrocketing since about 2000. Autistic children has also been skyrocketing. So is ADHD and other spectrum diseases. But what are all these? These are all about wiring in the brain. Our wiring in the brain has become more complex, causing problems, but nature is trying to rewire our brains at birth. That's why this stuff is coming from birth. Now what they have recently discovered is you have the rising number of gifted children. They're also finding out 70% of autistic children, 70% of ADHD children, and other spectrum disease. They're discovering 70% of them are also gifted. Just don't know how to express it. In other words, the gifted children are the first, or either between Homo sapiens and Homo paradoxus, or Homo paradoxus. This is already happening. Now the problem is whenever you have a revolution or change. Now this is going to be coordinated with the scientific revolution, which is unification. And I think my theory is one. I don't know. I think it is, but is that ego or my science? It has to be verified.
That's the point. Yes.
I put it on the internet. I put it on the internet 4 weeks ago. Exactly 30 days ago. 4 weeks ago this past Friday. And since then I've had 50 downloads a day.
Yeah.
Over 1,500 people picked it up off the internet. I haven't even sent it to a publisher yet. I haven't decided what journal to publish it in. And already there are 50 people every day downloading it. There is interest in it. There is a lot of interest because in the past 30 days it's skyrocketed to about 20 of my other papers, as much read as 20 of my other papers that have been on the internet for 20 years. I'm more interested in this than anything I've done. So it is popular. Now I say that those last two are nature trying to evolve us because it's happening at birth. In other words, we have stretched our Homo sapiens brain, inherited a little over 100,000 years ago to its limits, and a refit upgrade is now being forced by our consciousness and nature as top-down, interacting with the pre-consciousness field. Other evidence.
You have to say most.
I ran out here, but I figured I wouldn't have time. We need to help this leap occur for our own benefit as well as prepare for this event. Why? Because any event like this is going to be preceded by what? Unbelievable chaos. Maximum chaos occurs before leap. That's previous use. And what are we experiencing in the world? Economic chaos, environmental chaos, political chaos, ISIS and all these idiots who are trying to take us backwards. They sense the leap is coming. They don't want it. They're fighting it. They want to be Homo sapiens who carry guns and blow up people. They are totally three-dimensional. Okay?
So get his card so you can find his website.
Well, I passed out the other day. If you didn't get
Okay.
one. All my websites are there.
And
Okay?
we got
Sorry
to
I
cut.
didn't get through more than I'll time for questions.
It was
You
wonderful.
can question.
Yeah, well,
Wonderful, thank you very much.
One thing, Do not buy the paperback book to die for over the internet. It's a ripoff, and they're cheating me out of my royalties. They charge $27 for it. I'm rewriting it. I wrote it 10 years ago. I'm rewriting it when it comes out in the fall to die for.
Well, do you have another?
I'm rewriting it right now in
Rewriting
a
it,
couple of months. I'm bringing it up to date to include all the stuff that I just did.
You're absolutely amazing. I think you're absolutely incredible.
Thank you. You work it.
He's right on most of
I
it.
tried not to. Everybody's sensing it. Everybody's saying it.
Like I said, you don't have, there's no test, you don't have to do
I think it's all
this.
Yes, there's like an interaction.
No test for
AI
anything.
revolution that's happening.
I wrote a
You don't have
second
to have a
book.
formula, it's just not gonna be tested. I'm sorry, I had to let him answer. You're asking a great question, I love it.
I was over 20 years.
You read fantastic, I love the question, you don't have time.
So far, you know.
Oh, I can remember. That's a singularity.
You know, next place.
I think he was talking about.
Otherwise, then he starts, he runs over.
No, he said
Everybody trying to catch planes.
2020
Fully
earlier.
expected.
2020 earlier.
I mean, that's long.
But what I'm saying is historic, and it's gonna take 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, so it started, so 20 years from now, I mean, we're gonna see a radically different world.
Which is supposedly way
If
faster.
they verify my theory, we're gonna have Star Trek.
So he's.
We will have faster than light travel, in my theory.
But it doesn't depend upon the advancements that have Although.
No, they've already got the engine, but they can't explain how it works.
Yeah, but why is that gonna advance human evolution?
Us traveling in outer space?
Oh, you saying this will help people advance further?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't realize
I say,
that this is.
see, the problem is, you have your Buddhist station, you realize you're Buddhist station, you got a full enlightenment, you can't describe it, you don't know what that is, you've experienced it, it's great, feel good, everything, you're out there, you're advanced, you realize when you die, and you're not scared to death, and all that other stuff. But you don't know what it is. Isn't it much better to know what it is? I just explained scientifically what it is. So you combine knowing what it is with it, and then we can actually utilize it and go beyond that. They'll take both steps to go beyond that. This is not the end, like I say, there's gonna be a whole lot more. I can sense there are states of consciousness beyond this.
Oh, beyond this.
Oh, yeah. We are still three-dimensional beings. I think eventually we're not gonna be three-dimensional, we'll be 5- and 6-dimensional beings, and that's what they talk
Is that what we're
about.
talking about? Right now, you're focused on one universe. There's multiple.
There's perfectly good reason to think there are other universes, yes, but
But this
I gotta focus on what I know. I
this is
gotta
focused on one
I
universe.
have to focus on what science can do.
Right, this is
This is
focused
what,
on one universe.
that's yeah, this is, because that's what we can do. In other words, all the things, all the is pure speculation.
So I need to.
I hope there are, I hope we discover them, but I think those will be better.
Just to make something, thank you, Joe.
From that first few days, talking to you over the meal, and I started opening my mind, and then you.
Well, I've just rewired all your brains. I want you to know that, I've rewired your brains.
You did.
Learning experiences,
I
you
could
learn.
feel it when I was in the room, in the back.
And re-magnetize my consciousness.
The back of my head, and I looked up and there's nothing above me, and I'm like, what is going on? What am I feeling?
Well, I want to get a copy of this to Dalai Lama, because he's working from the other end to unify science. And I'd love to have him come in and listen. I've listened to him.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't wait to talk to Kurt about this, because
Okay.
my vision is to take this and make it visual for people. Because
Well-
most people can't understand the words and the linearity.
Yeah.
They need pictures. I told them.
Yeah, well, I've got another friend, he's the only person I've ever gone off to an article with, and we're still looking for publisher with that does exactly what you're saying.
Can I talk, can you connect? Sometimes-
It's all in academia.net. If you go there, this address, academia.net/Jimmy,
Okay.
you can sign in to either Facebook or Google Plus.
Okay, okay.
And then once you're signed in, you go to, you can do my page,
Okay.
which that's what that is. And just the top articles, they're my latest, and just look through those.
Is this online?
Actually, this is the paper, and I just put this paper 2 weeks ago online.
So I can read this again?
You can read all this again, what the graphs
With
are.
the pictures and everything? I'm sorry.
Well, but you go back 10 years, you can look at, talk to
No, no,
here, 10 years.
I just want to read this.
Yeah, no, this one, it's a full, it's a little bit long, 25 pages type.
Okay.
And it's going to become the new chapter for my book To Die For. That's why I say don't buy the book, because I'm bringing it out to Amazon so I can sell it for $10 a copy.
So also though, maybe we'll be able to if you wanted to get a copy of his talk from here, like, she called me out. She actually called me out.
Oh.
Like this exactly.